According to a Harvard Business Review article, a customer journey map is a very simple idea, a diagram that illustrates the steps your customers go through in engaging with your company. Mapping customer journeys, however, isn't simple. Journeys are highly individual and complex. Many details are hard to remember post-purchase. Journey mapping, therefore, is typically conducted in a qualitative environment, guided by a moderator. That approach allows for deeper understanding of each individual, but expensive and difficult to scale, which makes it hard to see big picture trends or account for different journeys of different customer types.
Does that sound familiar? That certainly speaks to my experience as a researcher in the Client Experience Design and Insights team at RBC Royal Bank of Canada, Canada's largest bank. Hello everyone, I'm Susan, and at RBC I support the development and application of market insights that are used by our segment strategy teams. One of those is the cultural markets team. Since most of Canada's population growth is heavily reliant on immigration, newcomers are an important source of business for us, and we're committed to insight-driven strategies to meet and exceed their needs and expectations. Over time, we've learned that the window to establish a relationship with newcomers is very small. When they arrive in the country, newcomers typically open their first Canadian bank account within a few days. In order to optimize our efforts, we wanted to improve our understanding of the process and the thinking that led up to the decision of which bank to use. In summer of 2019, we partnered with Nexxt Intelligence and had more than 900 newcomers recreate their individual journeys to opening their first bank account in Canada. I'm excited to share our experience as a case study today. In the next 15 minutes or so, we'll be talking about how the idea came about, the methodology and the technology we used, and the outcome and impact on RBC's business.
And I am Kathy from Nexxt Intelligence, a Toronto-based insight technology company. We built a conversational AI platform, Inca, designed to help marketers understand consumers in depth and at scale through engaging research experiences and individualized conversations. I'm really excited to team up with Susan today to share the case study and how Inca helped scale customer journey mapping. Susan, I still remember vividly the meeting with the team and how the idea of creating an interactive journey building experience emerged.
Me too, Kathy. At RBC, we've been tracking key metrics such as overall market penetration, first bank relationship, and decision-making dynamics among newcomers in Canada for over 10 years. But in 2019, in addition to the brand metrics, the team wanted a deeper understanding of newcomers' journeys to their first bank in Canada. We felt that understanding their paths to purchase and influencers would give us better insight on where we could strengthen our performance.
Inca was brought in because it's able to mimic in-depth interviews led by a chatbot with an audience of any size. But journey mapping requires much more than just a conversation. It needs visual aids, just like how we use a framework and lots of sticky notes when we do journey mapping in person. For a chatbot-led interview, it's even more important to have a visual guide to help participants recount their path to purchase step by step and capture the nuances. Then Joey on the team said, I wish the participants could drag and drop steps to create their own journey. And that's exactly what we did.
Knowing that it might be difficult to recall details of a process that happened a few months before, we showed our study respondents predetermined steps based on previous research that we had conducted, and we included opportunities for participants to add their own steps in case we were missing anything.
Newcomers were asked to drag the relevant steps and drop them onto the journey in order. For example, if the first thing they did was researching online before coming to Canada, they drag and drop researched online before the Canadian flag. They also talked to their family or friends before coming, so drag that before the Canadian flag as well. After arriving, they heard about a newcomer offer. Then they were referred to a bank representative through a friend. Then they made an appointment and visited the branch. After they created their journey, they were asked to provide more details for each step. For example, which banks did they consider at each of the steps? How did they feel?
Those details were important. When we do in-person journey mapping, we go to great lengths trying to understand and establish those, and we wanted to be sure we weren't missing anything.
Speaking of that, Susan, maybe can we pause for a moment here? I'd be very curious to hear how journey mapping is otherwise conducted at RBC. I'm sure that would be of great interest to our audience as well.
Sure. At RBC, we believe it's absolutely critical to talk to customers, current ones and prospective ones, and not just make assumptions based on our internal perspective. And so our process of creating a customer journey map is extensive. We usually start with a detailed spreadsheet that outlines key events, customer motivations, and areas of friction within the user's experience. Then we combine this information into a comprehensive visual that describes clients' experiences with us. The challenge, though, is that today's customers interact with us as a brand in ways that are tricky to pin down. Customers often take a back and forth, cyclical, multi-channel journey. The mapping can be hard to average. That's why we need the scale that Inca could provide us with to help us see the big picture trends and patterns and put individual journeys into perspective.
That's great to hear. Maybe could you elaborate a bit more on what you meant by putting individual journeys into perspective? How does that help in your CX design?
Well, by that, I mean the ability to discern and prioritize the important over the trivial so that we can focus on problems and opportunities that have the most potential to impact business results. For example, we need to find and understand paths that lead to a desired action, account opening, for example, as well as those paths that typically don't lead to that action so that we can see what might not be working too.
That's actually a great segue back to our case study. We talked about how we use the Inca to scale conversations, and that allowed journey mapping with over 900 newcomers. Let's take a look at what kind of insights the scale helped bring. Based on the steps newcomers dragged and dropped onto their individual journey to their first bank account in Canada, we were able to see what purchase paths were more common than others. This chart shows paths that had 5 or fewer steps. This accounts for 85% of all the paths. Or in other words, for the rest of the 15% of newcomers, they went through more than 5 steps. I'd like to mention the stats we're presenting today are slightly modified from the real findings because of the proprietary nature of the research. We're focusing on the methodology rather than the actual findings for the purpose of today's talk. Now back to this chart. The innermost circle represents the first step, then the second step, third step, etc., moving outward. Based on this chart, we're able to see some general patterns. For example, roughly 30% of newcomers started with their family or friends.
We love this chart. It was a great visual representation of how diversified customer journeys are. We knew that was likely the case, but this was the first time for us to see the paths quantified and validated. And that's exactly what I meant by the big picture view and putting individual journeys into perspective.
To add on to that, another interesting perspective we adopted when analyzing the journeys was to tie the journeys to personas. Based on previous research, we had come to know 2 types of newcomer customers: the fast trackers, who open their first bank accounts very quickly, usually within the first day of arrival, versus the planners, who appear to take more time before making their first bank decision. We were able to take a look at their respective path to purchase side by side.
I'm glad you brought it up, Kathy. That's a good example of how much we could do when there's scale. As I mentioned before, one of the challenges in attracting and acquiring newcomer clients is how tiny that window of opportunity is. Again, from previous research, we had a good idea that these 2 different types of newcomer customers, in terms of their needs and considerations, But with Inca, we were able to understand them in terms of the touch points. That understanding revealed opportunities to engage with newcomers with the right amount and type of information at the right time and using the most effective channel. For example, some newcomers were largely reliant on friends and relatives to provide guidance, while others worked more independently and put more weight on their own information collection process.
Another way we sliced the data was by their relationship or engagement with RBC. Using the information newcomer participants provided at each step of their journey, we were able to pinpoint what percentage of newcomers had some interactions with RBC. Among those, what percentage went to a branch, and what percentage of the branch visitors turned into customers. This funnel became really powerful when we compare with competitive banks. It quickly showed where each of the banks was more effective in converting curiosity into interest, and at which steps or touch points each of the banks appeared to be more vulnerable or more likely to lose customers compared to competition.
If I had to pick the two most enlightening charts from the research, I would have picked those two. We had been very used to looking at competitive landscapes through the lens of penetration, acquisition, retention, NPS, etc. But this research provided a brand new perspective that allowed us to see our competitive advantages and disadvantages at different touch points with quantitative metrics. That really helped us see the hidden opportunities and focus on implementing the customer experience changes that would have the biggest impact. Before this, some assumed that most newcomers did in-depth research on all their banking options. That just wasn't true.
That's awesome to hear. We were excited to be able to provide that new competitive view in addition to the traditional brand-centric metrics as well. What's even more exciting was we were able to illustrate the triggers and frictions at each of the touch points in consumers' own language, gathered through the conversations Inca had with the over 900 newcomers. Let's take branch experience as an example, which had been one of the more important touch points, although its importance might have changed because of COVID. Those newcomers who were frustrated by their first branch visit experience were saying, I felt like I wasn't supposed to be there. Maybe slow down a bit on explaining the benefits of what's included. They were not polite and did not understand what I was not aware of. Let's look at another example, online research as a touch point. Frustrated newcomers were saying, understanding the products was quite confusing because the terms are different from what I'm used to. So it involved a lot of Googling on the side. There's way too much information online. I think an online chat option would have been helpful.
Those verbatims really brought the journeys to life, and they made the findings even more actionable for us. We looked into both customers acquired and our opportunities missed. The verbatims helped us understand what worked for them and what didn't through the lens of newcomers, often on their first day in a new country, maybe speaking a new language, trying to make sense of a very different banking system. What they were telling us was very clear, and it allowed us to refine our approach to reflect their needs with a more empathetic mindset. The richness of those insights helped us to optimize various elements of the brand message and touch points, and it guided us to work on strategies to improve our customer experience by improving conversations and customer engagement.
That's wonderful to hear, Susan. It's really nice to have this opportunity to talk through the project with you and hear directly from you what aspects of the research added value. Insights aside, could I also ask a question related to business impact? Did the research impact decision-making in any ways? By that, I mean, for example, did it help lead to better decisions maybe? More certainty about the changes needed maybe? Or maybe easier to get buy-in from stakeholders to make necessary changes?
Yes, the insights drove decisions in many ways. For example, they led us to more confident rebalancing of our pre versus post-arrival efforts and digital versus in-branch initiatives because we could see how the newcomer preferences came into play. We worked on fixing specific areas where we could now see in a reliable and quantified way that we were inadvertently missing opportunities to close the deal with newcomers who had shown interest in us. And using the insights we obtained, we were also able to re-examine our approach to influencers.
Thanks for sharing, Susan. That concludes our case study perfectly. We'd like to leave with our audience 3 key takeaways from the case study. First, using conversational AI and interactive user interface, we were able to overcome complexities in customer journey mapping. Second, through engaging research conversations at scale, we were able to map individual journeys while identifying common touchpoints, triggers, and pain points. Third, by scaling journey mapping, we were able to provide competitive advantages and disadvantages by touchpoint with quantitative metrics.
And we hope the case study will spark further conversations among our peers on innovations to tackle consumer decision-making as dynamic and complex as the customer journey. We'd love to hear from you. Please get in touch via contact info on the screen. Thank you.
Thank you.